I've just talked in my lecture here in the OII's undergraduate lecture series about some of the interesting issues that come up in the economics of the internet search industry. So the search industry is obviously massive news these days. Every second of every day, about 3,000 people whack the search button on Google. Around half of the top 20 websites in the world are either search engines or else websites that offer some kind of search service. So they're really central and fundamental to everything that goes on the web, and a key starting point for people who are trying to get into the web. When you look at a typical Google search results page, or likewise a search results page at another major search engine, what you typically find is that on the right-hand side of the page, you have one list of links, and on the left-hand side of the page, you have a separate, distinct list of links. So the larger of these two lists on the left-hand side of the page are what are known as organic search results. So this is a list of results which Google's search algorithm is generating in real time in response to your query, and they constitute Google's attempt to find what are the best results for the particular search query that the user has come and entered. The links which are shown separately on the right-hand side of the page, and also sometimes across the top of the page, used to be known as sponsored search results. These days they're known more prosaically as advertisements. And they are just that. These are ads which companies have paid to have placed alongside the search results for the chance of appearing there close to the top of the page for a given keyword. And they're really fundamental to the business model of the major search engines. They're the key way by which the search engines have monetized. To give an idea of the scale of this kind of business, each year around $11 billion are spent on search keyword advertising, so on these little text ads that appear alongside the search results. And that's around about half of all of the money that's spent on online advertising of all forms. So if we try to think more formally about exactly how Google's business is structured, Google basically serves the role of an intermediary which exists to bring together two distinct groups of users. On the one hand, you have the search engine users, which are people who are trying to find a website or of relevance to their particular query. And on the other side, you have the proprietors of those websites, who are often firms, companies which are looking to sell products to the people who are doing the searching. And what Google does as an intermediary is it connects these two people together, hopefully to the mutual advantage of both. Now, one remarkable thing about Google and its business model is that as a user, I'm able to access this really powerful search function completely free of charge. So what this represents on Google's part is a big concession made to its users. It's giving them access to this really powerful tool at no cost. And what Google hopes to achieve by doing that is to maximize the number of people who are using the search engine. Because at the same time, what that does is it maximizes the number of people who are looking at the ads that are placed alongside those search terms. So on the one hand, Google is making this concession to the users by letting them search for free, but on the other, once there's this nice big user base of searchers, Google then hopes to reap the rewards of that by being able to charge more to the advertisers for this big audience that's being exposed to the advertisements. And this is not at all an uncommon business model. So we see, for example, newspapers subsidize readers to maximize ad income. Credit card companies subsidize users who often pay no annual fee in order to extract as much revenue as possible from merchants in the form of transaction fees. And typically the way that such a business model works is that we subsidize the group that's going to create the biggest benefit for the people on the other side of the platform, and having subsidized those guys, we then extract that benefit that's created in the form of higher fees on the other side of the platform. So we're subsidizing users and we have this nice big audience for the advertisements, but then we come to the problem of how do we price those ads and how do we allocate them? And this is really a non-trivial problem. Firstly, we have an infinity of possible keywords, each of which potentially produces a different set of advertisements. Within that set of advertisements, there's a list structure, and obviously firms would prefer to appear closer to the top of the Google search results page, where most of the user's attention is going to be directed, rather than in one of the ads that is closer to the bottom of the page. And then there's also a lot of heterogeneity between the different advertisers themselves. And so it's not clear how much a given advertiser is willing to pay to go into a given slot on a given keyword. But we have a really well-established way of dealing with this kind of problem of allocating resources whose value is uncertain, and that is to run an auction. And that's precisely what organizations like Google and the other major search engines do, is they auction off the opportunity of advertising alongside a given keyword. In fact, they use a special kind of auction known as a generalized second price auction. And the way this works in practice is that the bidders, that is the advertisers, log on to Google's system, they enter how much they're willing to pay for the right to advertise on a given keyword, and then the advertisers are ranked according to their bids, with the highest bidder going into the top slot. But the trick with a generalized second price auction is that the bidders pay not their own bid, rather they pay the bid of the guy who appears in the slot below them. So the bidder in the second slot pays the third highest bid, and the bidder in the third slot pays the fourth highest bid, and so on. This auction framework has a few really desirable properties. Firstly, it tends to ensure that the best ads are allocated to the firms which value them the most. Otherwise, such firms would have an incentive to outbid the people who are in the top slot. And also, it lends the entire mechanism a degree of stability. So if we imagine charging instead the advertisers not the bid of the person below them on the list, but their own bid, then each advertiser is going to have an incentive to go back to the system and reduce its bid to the level at which it's just outbidding the person below. So what tends to happen is that all the bids get squeezed really close together. And then once all the bids are squeezed very close together, the guy on the bottom of the list finds that a very small increase in his bid is enough to take him from the bottom of the list all the way up to the top. And so you get this kind of circularity and the whole thing becomes unstable. In the generalized second price auction, the amount that I pay doesn't depend on my bid, it depends on somebody else's bid, namely the person below me, and therefore changing my bid doesn't change the amount that I pay, and I have no incentive to change my bid. And so the whole arrangement is a lot more stable. The price that's paid for the ads is paid on a per-click basis. So that is to say, once my ad is shown to a consumer, I don't pay for that impression on the consumer unless the consumer clicks on my ad. This has proven popular with advertisers as a solution to the problem highlighted by John Wanamaker, who famously quipped, "Half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. The trouble is I don't know which half." So when I'm paying for advertisements on a per-click basis, I only pay for the consumers who click, which in principle means that I'm only paying for the consumers who in some way have shown some interest in my advertisement. This does have a downside for Google, and that is that there's a danger that some advertisers will bid a high per-click price but then get only a few clicks, and therefore the total revenue for Google is fairly low. And the way that Google addresses this problem is that it ranks advertisers not only by their bid for a per-click price, but by a combination of that bid along with something called a quality score, which is roughly a measure of how many clicks the firm will get. So we're ranking firms according to how much in total they're going to be paying for the ad, which is a combination of how much they bid and how many clicks they will get. Google also uses a reserve price when allocating its advertisements. And what we mean when we say that is that Google commits itself to not show ads by firms whose bid is not high enough, so firms which aren't prepared to pay very much per click. And this has a couple of desirable effects from Google's point of view. Firstly, by instituting reserve price, we force firms which don't face very much competition to pay the reserve price rather than to pay the second highest bid, which may in fact be very low. So the reserve price serves as a minimum price per click in cases when the price paid would be a lot lower than the reserve price were it not in place. And the reserve price also serves as a second valuable function, which is a commitment on Google's part not to show ads which the consumers are likely to find irrelevant. So the firms which bid a very high per click price are likely to be firms which are very likely to turn a click into a sale, which in turn are the firms which are very likely to serve consumers' interests. And by committing itself not to show ads from firms which are not likely to serve the consumer's interests, Google encourages consumers to click on those ads which it does show. In turn, in effect, what Google is saying to the consumers is, I'm not going to show you the useless ads, so you can be sure when I do show you an ad, it's an ad that you want to click on. And so in that sense, the reserve price serves both Google's interests and the interests of the consumers.